Every day, the world moves on as it always has. Cities wake up, work begins, and life feels familiar. But beneath that sense of normality, something is shifting. The climate is changing, and the systems we rely on, energy, food, water, cities, finance, are under pressure in ways we're only beginning to understand. These changes don't live in reports or projections, they are already shaping people, livelihoods, and communities. We created the Climate Leadership Podcast so these challenges don't remain abstract or distant, but are explored through the people working inside these systems, making real decisions with real consequences, often without clear answers. This is not a space for fear, blame, or perfection. It's a space for honest conversations about what leadership looks like in a changing world. If you're listening, you're already part of that leadership. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to another episode of the Climate Leadership Podcast, where we explore the ideas, technologies, and leadership shaping a climate future. Today, we are discussing a critical question. If climate innovation is accelerating around the world, why are so many promising solutions struggling to achieve meaningful scale? From clean energy and carbon removal to AI-powered climate technologies, groundbreaking innovations are emerging every year. Yet the challenge often isn't creating solutions, it's about scaling them. To help us explore this topic, I am joined by Mr. Benjamin Combs, a climate strategist, economist, innovation leader, and former director at Monitor Deloitte. Benjamin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I very much look forward to the conversation.
Yes, so before we begin, can you share a bit about your climate innovation journey so far?
So I got an economics degree from the University of Edinburgh. I went into macroeconomics for a while and really enjoyed the sort of growth aspect. But quite early on in my career, I realized I wanted to sort of have a purpose, make an impact. So decided to go back to university and study for a master's in environmental and resource economics at UCL, which was a lot of fun, mainly because peak oil was becoming on the agenda, as well as Nick Stern being commissioned to do the Stern review. And I then got into climate. So my second phase of the career was in climate. I was in the climate change economics team at DEFRA, and then at the climate change committee, which was really interesting, helping set up the carbon budget framework and the Climate Change Act. So really enjoyed that. And then I went and worked at a macroeconomic advisory firm to sort of bring together the economics and the sustainability focus at Llewellyn Consulting, which is now called Independent Economics, which was really interesting, working with banks and financial institutions about their bringing those macro drivers into their portfolios. And then innovation for me really kicked off from there, where I joined PwC in 2016 and helped set up an innovation and sustainability practice, really bringing innovation to the core of what we were doing on sustainability. Interestingly, I think we're nearly a decade from that first report, Innovation for the Earth, that we did at PwC, which was the sort of launch pad to working with others, including Microsoft and World Economic Forum at that time. And then in my previous role that I've just finished at Monitor Deloitte, we were really trying to harness the sort of digital strategy capability into climate positive corporate strategy. So thinking about how digital as a horizontal is similar to climate and sustainability, that it's across all sectors, across all themes, across all markets. How do you bring that into corporate strategy? So it's been a sort of long and winding road on innovation, but it's always sort of been a backbone for me, and clearly the technology that comes alongside that.
Right. Okay, so we often hear about breakthrough climate technologies and innovative startups. In your view, why is scaling climate innovation proving far more difficult than developing the innovation itself?
Once you've got the innovation, and whether that's in a lab or wherever that has been developed, I think there are a number of aspects here that are important. There's, the price point, where that's coming in relative to the existing technology that's doing the same thing? Is it more expensive? Are people willing to pay a potential premium for that? Now, hopefully, if you've got carbon pricing, that will help cover some of the differential and bring those things to market. There's also things about performance and quality. I think people aren't that willing to compromise on performance and quality for green and sustainable goods. So you really need to make sure that these new goods, if they're less impact on the planet, and whether that's carbon and CO2 or whether that's lower waste, it really needs to be as good performance, and the quality needs to be there. And I think that's the real challenge, is that you can make these goods, but you really need to make sure to get mass adoption that they have performance and quality, because I think without that you will only be able to get 5, 10, 15, 20% of the market who perhaps are the sort of, let's call them the green leaders. But to get to the mainstream, performance and quality is key.
Right. So, having worked with many startups, investors, corporations, and governments, where do you see the biggest bottleneck preventing promising climate solutions from achieving widespread adoption?
I feel as though when we talk about sustainability, there's been a misconception that it isn't linked to performance and innovation and quality. I think if people, think of the word technology or some of the other things that people talk about scaling quickly, automatically those other words are associated with what people are thinking. So for me, the challenge with climate and sustainability, climate tech, is to really show that these are better products. So for example, the reason Tesla scaled quickly is it was a better car. The fact that it was an electric vehicle was almost secondary. Better acceleration, better experience for drivers, and then obviously the electrification point and the optimization of network point through AI are also incredibly important, but it's a package. And I think that when we look at climate sustainability solutions, we need to be thinking in the round as to what is the product or service offering against the sort of default existing solution. And I think once you get to a better solution, you will reach scale.
Right. So it's like I'm providing a better product and sustainability with it. So that is a byproduct, which is also very important. So that kind of positioning.
Absolutely. But I do think, just to be absolutely clear, sustainability needs to be a design principle. It needs to be in there from the start. You can't just make products and then at the end say, oh gosh, we now need to think about sustainability. It really needs to be in there from the beginning. But I do think that you need to think about other aspects as well. The economics is incredibly important, where the policy framework is going, the risk associated with it, but also getting customers to understand the quality of the brand of the products that you're making.
Right. So, I mean, if there's a new product and it says we are sustainable and we use good quality material, sourcing of the material and everything, there are a few things that comes to people's mind, like it will be high cost, it might not deliver the right efficiency or performance, like you said. So, are these media generated, or is there any truth in this?
Well, I think you have to look at a case-by-case basis. But I do think such innovations like the Earthshot Prize, I think, are very helpful in that respect, in terms of looking at some of these products and services and saying, we've done some due diligence as part of our prize nomination, and we think these are sort of what's the right word? Startups to look at more closely. I mean, that it's not a badge of quality mark, is it? But it certainly sort of says, look, we've looked at some of these and we think they're doing interesting things, and we think they're worth a closer look. I think the more we can do that with understanding where products are and how they're developing, the more people can sort of try and test things as well for themselves, and word of mouth and how consumer products spread. I don't think we should see consumer products separate from sustainable consumer products separate from broader consumer products. I think that, and this is one of the reasons I spent a stint in corporate strategy, is because I think the strategy around personas, what people want and need, is similar, and I think we need to do that in a similar way. We also need to understand personas in terms of people's age ranges. So, for example, people might want to switch to a heat pump if they're in their 30s or 40s. Perhaps if in their 70s or 80s, they may find that the technological switch and being able to manage the new system might be too much, or they might need help from family or friends. And so you need to think about who is going to switch and when it's in their best interest, and when people might not switch as quickly as you think, because of people making their own rational decisions. And I think that's really fundamental, is not assuming that everyone will act in the same way when taking up adoption of sustainable goods and services. I think you need to think much more deeply at the persona level of the types of people, obviously age range, but also incomes, also type of housing stock. Have they got room for parking? Have they got room for a power wall? These types of things are really important.
Yes. Benjamin, one more thing I have come across, or when I was talking to some people in the US, they say that there are more funds available in the US for startups compared to Europe or UK. Do you think, is there any reason why that might be the case?
I mean, I think that's, we wouldn't have to be talking about sustainability or climate for that to be the case. So I think it strikes me that landscape mirrors the broader landscape for venture and growth capital in the US vis-a-vis Europe and the UK. So I don't think the climate and energy or climate sustainability has been particularly singled out in that instance. I just think that the structure of the US economy, for various reasons, has enabled it to provide those venture and growth funds. Perhaps more success has been seen, perhaps more risk is willing to be taken. So I think I would look broadly at those markets from a whole economy perspective, and not just a sort of climate and energy or climate sustainability one.
True, yeah. So many climate startups successfully raise early stage funding, but they struggle to reach commercial scale. What separates the companies that succeed from those that fail?
Well, I think, it goes back a bit to what I was saying earlier about, you've got to have a good product that customers want, and you've got to understand your target customer groups. They've got to have the quality and performance. You need to understand about whether you're getting repeat purchases as well. Do people try this and still like it and want to buy the second or third generation of whatever the product or service is? You also need good management. You need companies to be run well. You need good leadership. And you need to sort of understand the market you're playing into, and you need to have a business model that's robust for different futures. So have you got enough diversification if the market doesn't go in the way that you're hoping? If for example, the policy doesn't come in quite as strongly, can you still survive as a market? Have you thought about your market positioning of where to play and how to win in a way that is robust to changing demands? And I think that's another area for sustainability to think about going forward, is in that more sort of traditional corporate strategy sense, have you got agility and flexibility to be able to operate when things change, as they inevitably will?
Right. So investors increasingly talk about climate opportunities. Are current investment models and expectations aligned with the realities of scaling climate technology?
I think the models probably at the moment are aligned with the outcomes that people can see at the moment. So why do people invest in technology? Because they've seen over very many cycles, over decades, if not centuries, that investing in technologies event brings return on investment. I think one of the struggles we've got with clean energy, climate tech, whatever name you want to call it, is that have people seen the outcomes? Now, I personally think that the good news is, with electrification, I think people are starting to see, oh, okay, we get that story. We get the story of electrification, optimization, automation all together as a transformational shift of one aspect of the economy in power and mobility. I think that is sort of broadly accepted. Now, the hope is that once you've sort of been able to tell that story, perhaps people have more faith that they can see in other areas, whether that be, the circular economy, whether that be decarbonizing industry. They can start to see the story from those other successes. But I do think that that's been more difficult, is to show that transformation. And now with power and mobility, particularly with sort of renewables and solar and wind, and on the mobility side with the electric vehicles and the fleet automation, people can start to see that change is really on its way and is providing results in different ways in different geographies for different companies.
So through your work with XPRIZE and global innovators, what emerging technologies or business models are you most excited about over the next decade?
I think all aspects of the economy, really. I think we're still very much at the foothills of the electrification, optimization, automation journey. I still think that's still got a long way to go. If you start thinking about the future of urban space, once you've got those technologies in place, I think I'm excited about new materials. As I say, once you start to think about those materials in a different way. So when I was at Deloitte, and this is public, we worked with McLaren and helping them think about a circular car. As you start to build in circularity to your design principles, you start to think about how might we do things at that very high end performance in a different way. So I think very excited about broadening the lens can give us quite different results, I think. So those are two areas. I think we've only really just got started on some of the other areas like healthcare and education and what we can do there in terms of harnessing technology to help both transform potentially those sectors in some ways, particularly higher education beyond school or healthcare, preventative healthcare before. So I think there's lots of ways in which technology combined with climate, we're obviously going to need to help with. I'm sitting in a very hot room, as may be noticeable at the top of my house in Canterbury. We're obviously going to need to deal with heat better. So there's a lot of solutions there about heating and cooling, but then also we need to think about how do we make sure we're not just using more and more energy, which obviously there's the AI energy and water challenge there as well.
Right. So large corporations often say they want innovation, yet startups frequently struggle to work with them. How can established businesses become better partners in accelerating climate innovation?
I think one thing I've learned from working with startups and with large global corporates is it's not a lack of will or a lack of desire to work together. Just to be absolutely clear to anyone watching or listening, it's the will is always there, I feel, between the people and very much like-minded people, whether the people are working in a business of 20 people or 20,000 people or 200,000 people. I think there's certain ways in which large corporates operate just in terms of their systems and processes. Which means that it can sometimes be hard to onboard smaller companies. Some of the sort of IT or regulatory hoops to jump through to become a supplier or a partner of some of these larger companies can be a barrier, and it's not an intentional one. It's just the way in which procurement and partnerships are set up at larger corporates. So I do feel as though through corporate venture arms, through various other means, partnerships with organizations, that point is being noted and getting better. And I do think corporates are starting to see, or have seen for some time, but it's accelerating the beneficial nature of working with startups and sharing those insights as to what technologies are coming down the track, how they're maturing, and how they're operating.
Right. I was also thinking like there is a kind of a business model, like if a big corporation is working with a startup and their technology scales at a very large point they can actually buy them and merge them with the bigger organization.
Yeah,
Is that true?
I think that's kind of what I was talking about. Corporate having a venture arm, an innovation and venture arm, which may co-invest in some startups to provide a return, provide a platform of services. So yes, I think that is absolutely doable. I do think, going back to earlier in the conversation, do need to make sure that there is a return, the product is good, it fits a gap in the market. So all of the sort of traditional corporate strategy elements are really important here. And I think, in terms of sort of, if you think about the digital revolution and digital strategy, if you can show the outcomes and the other side of the transformation, I think that really helps. So it's almost like, if you are going to partner with startups, what does success look like in 3 to 5 years? How can the startup and the large corporate potentially benefit from this goal?
Right. So artificial intelligence is transforming industries worldwide. How do you see AI helping accelerate climate solutions, and where do you believe its greatest impact could be?
I think AI is going to transform most sectors and industries, as the internet did 20 years ago, and this is probably turbocharged because it's starting from a digital layer, whereas back in the 90s, when I was sort of leaving school, we were very much in an analog world. I was talking to someone actually, and I wrote a piece on LinkedIn about the sort of dot-com boom, and I think that the important thing to say is this is definitely going quicker than dot-com. I felt dot-com was pretty much sort of 98, 97, all the way through to 2010. And obviously there was the sort of bust in 2000, 2001, but then the sort of recovery, and Facebook was founded in 2004, etc. So I do sort of think that was a sort of 12 to 14 year journey, but it does feel with AI, if you think about ChatGPT in 2022, and we're only in 2026, and we've already sort of cycling through Gen AI. Now we're talking about agentic AI, and there's still, obviously, we haven't even got to the maximum impact of machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, and all the other AI techniques that I started looking at a decade ago. So I think the first thing to say is I think it will touch every sector and industry in profound ways. I think the other important thing to say is I think at the moment a lot of people are using these tools in the same way they're using their existing workflows and adding in the AI tools. Now, I think the real transformation will occur when people start doing things in fundamentally different ways. So when I first started using email, for example, at university in 1997 at Edinburgh University, I checked the email once a day. I went to the computer library, I went and checked my email inbox, had a look, replied to a couple of things, left, checked it the next day. So I was literally using it as though it was the post. But obviously we now use email in a fundamentally different way. Yes, 25, 28 years on now. But I think it's just an important point about how people are using the technologies. They're starting, don't get me wrong, with Claude, they're starting to use things in very different ways. But I think we're very much at the foothills of that. And how people work, how they operate, I think will change fundamentally over the next 5 to 10 years. It's hard to say what I'm most excited about, because it's a bit like sitting in 2002. I'm very excited about the continuation of what we can see already, which is the optimization and automation of vehicles and power, and link those all together. I think that's an incredibly interesting story. I think it will provide mobility to people who don't currently have mobility. I think there's ways in which it might free up land for we may not need all these huge car parks if there are autonomous vehicles around. So I think I'm excited about how AI is going to automate systems and provide hopefully safer systems. I'm excited about the discovery element. So I used to say, about before Gen AI, when we just had sort of machine and a bit of deep learning, that AI does two things: optimization and discovery. And I think that the discovery element is huge. I mean, in terms of computer vision and what we can discover from our ancient communities to what's going on in the rainforest to what's going on in our oceans. I think that the power of these tools is going to be fundamentally important in climate action, in biodiversity, and all the other areas in nature. And then also, yeah, can AI, with the right use, help us solve some of the problems that we've got? I mean, we can see it's already solving some of the long-term math issues or math challenges. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, probably the wrong word, but you understand what I mean, that these sort of intractable challenges that have been solved. Well, we've got some difficult challenges with climate and reducing emissions. Can it help solve some of those things? I do want to mention, though, we've obviously got the energy and water use issue at the moment. So I really do hope that we do start to see much more energy efficient and water efficient AI, which I do think is coming, by the way. I know some people are looking into it. For example, at the X Prize, energy efficient AI was one of the sort of finalists from Visioneering a couple of years ago, and I know they're still sort of working on that. So watch this space there as a prize idea. So I think that we do need to sort of manage the impact as well as sort of looking at the potential. That's going to be very important.
Right. So governments play a critical role in shaping markets. What policies or regulatory changes would most effectively help climate innovation scale faster?
I mean, the classic one. I'm an economist, so I have to say it. But carbon pricing, it's statically and dynamically efficient. We've obviously got a range of carbon prices in the UK, in Europe, in other areas, in the US and China too. So that those are coming. But if you get them in certain sectors and not others, if you get them on certain things and not other goods and services, they can create distortions. We've seen the argument over CBAM between the global north and global south, the carbon border adjustment mechanism for those who aren't aware of it, because obviously if Europe is paying the carbon price and then importing goods from the rest of the world. So I think there's a lot still to be done on carbon pricing. My main one that I would really advocate for is changing defaults. From nudge theory, sort of Thaler, the idea that it was interesting because I think him and Sunstein, but maybe I should just say from the book Nudge. What was interesting is they were at Stanford University and they realized that their default pension scheme was in some sort of really suboptimal investment category, like not even thought through, not even the sort of best in class, forget about sustainability, but just like, oh, here's the default. It's, whatever it was, I can't quite remember, but it was a very sort of, an investment analyst or anyone who worked in financial markets would not have put anything substantive in there, let alone hundreds of thousands of dollars. So one of the things they did was change the default of the Stanford pension scheme, which then meant millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions. I don't quite know the size of it, but suddenly, over time, obviously, as it builds, as more people put into it, it got changed. So I think government thinking about what the faults are is a very important nudge that can change things, and whether that be energy efficient or whether that be, and a lot of this is trying to be done obviously in terms of electric vehicles and the timescales of those, when people can have a gas boiler. So I think those are big ticket items, and I think some of those are difficult because whether people have got the money to put the money up front, and it goes back to the personas and the willingness to switch. But there are smaller things I think you can do that can have a big impact, and I think it sounds a small one, but the plastic bag one I think was an interesting one. The default was you don't get one, but you have to pay for one. And then now nearly everyone has paper bags, and things have shifted beyond what was originally proposed. So I think we do have to bring people on the journey here. And obviously there are much bigger changes we need to make over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But I do think that trying to sort of change some of those defaults that aren't going to have a massive impact financially or for people's experience, but are going to start to shift the system and get people thinking about what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Okay, so looking ahead, future to 2035, what sectors or technologies do you believe will experience the most significant climate-driven transformation?
I mean, I suppose it depends in terms of which. I mean, I think all sectors will deliver an amount of transformation would be my guess, because all sectors need to decarbonize, and although we talk about net zero by 2050, it may well be absolute zero by 2100. So we are going to have to get our emissions down markedly. I mean, my guess is that all sectors will have a huge amount of um, transformation potential. So if you look 30 years in advance, um, it's very hard to think about what the economy will look like. So if you look back to 1995, it was very much an analog world. 1996, very much an analog world. Yeah, if you took someone to 2026, they wouldn't understand really what an iPhone was. They wouldn't really understand what QR codes were. They certainly wouldn't understand cars driving by themselves, or things charging themselves, and the whole digital framework. I mean, the internet was in it very much in its infancy. Email, the way we operate, the way we work, working from home. I mean, there's just so many things that change in a 30-year period that we all take for granted now. And interestingly, I think it was, Amazon was founded in '94. I think Google '96 and Netflix '97, or around that time. So I do sort of feel as though, the changes to come we don't even really know about yet. So I won't speculate too much there. I think it's it, but I do think it's the classic sort of Bill Gates comment that people overestimate change in 1 year and underestimate it in 10. And I think that's the important point here. If you look back 10 years ago, um, the sort of electrification of mobility was in its infancy, and just look at the shift that's had in 10 years. So I'm hoping that we're going to start to see a broadening of impact from climate and decarbonisation, and thinking a lot about those other sectors that we need to. Land use is another one, by the way, in terms of what we can do with land use. And I think this is one of the areas where AI can really help in terms of monitoring and in terms of helping the best manage land. So I think the industry decarbonisation is going to be really important as well, around how companies are going about decarbonising factories, processes, and this is where a combination of design of factories is going to be important. So, for example, I was just talking to someone earlier today actually about when electricity came in, the people who really made the most of electricity coming in the sort of 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, were people who built new factories that set up in a way that operated for electricity. And I think we're going to see similar with AI and robots and autonomous vehicles. Where we're going to get the maximum impact of that is where that's been part of the design principle, not necessarily retrofitting, although retrofit will be obviously done as well.
Okay. So, Benjamin, before I close the podcast show, like I was thinking, we have been talking about renewables and Paris Agreement and everything, and the world is slowly changing. But still, during the conflict, we saw that the 80% of world's oil flows through these channels, and world is so much dependent on oil and gas. So, are you optimistic in the future? Like, how much time will it take for things to slowly move more towards renewable?
I think it's really going to come down to whether we've got better products and services. So I've always been convinced, and you can look through my LinkedIn archives, I've always been convinced about electrification, and it's not just because of climate change, but it's because of it's easier to automate electric vehicles. Electric vehicles also have the benefit of having better air quality and lower noise, which is going to be really important in urban environments. So in terms of those, as a understanding of those technologies. So, and people say things haven't shifted, and perhaps this is the final thing I'll leave people with. But I was in rooms in Whitehall in 2008 when we were discussing moving from 60% reduction in the UK to an 80% GHG reduction. People were slamming the desks and saying, we can't do this. The Markow modeling, the market allocation modeling says to do the 80%, we would have to, we would we still need coal, so therefore we can't ever get rid of coal. I mean, that was the consensus in Whitehall for most people in 2008, was we will never, not just think about that word, never get coal off the system. And yet in 2024, 2025, we did pretty much gone from the UK power system. So I think we need to be a little bit careful that we say nothing's changed. Well, our energy grid has changed hugely. And actually in 2012, 2013, I was working with a family office in Switzerland who were very close, talking to Angela Merkel about the nuclear situation there. And there was a whole debate about how much renewables you could get on the system. And the common consensus around that time was about 20 to 30% renewables on the system. And it's why, by the way, the EU package was 20% in 2008, was 20% reduction in emissions by 2020 with 20% renewables. There was a real fear that if it went much above 20 or 30% of renewables on the European or the EU grid system, that things would start to not work. Now, you can already see that those numbers seem tiny now in comparison to how much renewables we've got in the system. We've got better storage, better battery technology. So I think we need to be a little bit careful saying that things haven't changed. I agree overall, the proportion, these are well-known stats. The sort of 80-20 is still there, but there have been shifts in some countries, in some sectors. Now, what we need to make sure is that we can deploy those more broadly in other countries and regions. And I think that's the real challenge, is how can we change the economics even further to get broader global deployment. But I think we need to be a bit careful of just sort of saying nothing is changing. I do think things are changing, but it is perhaps taking longer than we would like. But I'm confident in a cleaner, quieter economy, because at the core of all of that is human wants and needs. I want to live in a clean, quiet, urban or rural environment. And I think that if you go back to what drives people's behavior in terms of buying products and services and thinking about some of the things we talked about earlier, why things aren't scaling, if you've got better products with better characteristics at the right economic price, they will sell, and they will scale. So I think it's really trying to get to that vantage point of saying we need to move into the mainstream, and make sure that we're understanding what consumers want too.
Mhm. Perfect. So thank you, Benjamin, for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. This conversation highlights an important reality. The world is not short of climate innovation. The technologies, ideas, and entrepreneurial talent already exist. The real challenge is creating conditions that allow these solutions to scale and deliver impact at the speed which is required. Success will depend on collaboration between innovators, investors, businesses, and policymakers working toward a common goal. Thank you for joining us on the Climate Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network. See you next time. Until then, take care and have a nice day. Bye bye.